Okay, well, apparently we're live. For everyone who is watching this, please hit the like button. Please hit those reactions because both me and Kirsty are very needy and we need validation on the internet. Leave some comments, leave some questions for us and stuff like that. I had all the best intentions of making this one hell of a show. I had plans to do like an intro video with music and stuff like that. But because it's the school holidays and the kids are off school, and I'm juggling working from home with the kids being around and the dog as well, those intentions were, alas, just intentions, and it hasn't actually come to fruition. So what we're going to do today, the title of this this chat that me and Kirsty are going to have is Riffing on Resilience. And for me, riffing is all about a bit of improv. So we're going to chat about our own experiences of resilience, what that means to us, what even is resilience? Is it a buzzword that everyone uses with no real definition, or how can we actually define that? And maybe even some practical stuff that you can take away from this and implement, not just in your own life, but also within your teams as well. It's a mini kind of soft launch, or part of the soft launch of my Stressonomics suite as well. So if you haven't already clocked that, there's a logo up there trying to point in the right direction. And if you head over to my website, jonwin.com, there is loads of information on Stressonomics there, which is a new suite around stress management and resilience and all that good stuff. So for those of you who actually, as well, if you're watching this, I can see a couple of people are coming onto this to watch it live. It will be available on replay as well. But can you drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from? Say hello. And if you're watching this on replay, do the same as well. So although we won't see this as we're doing it, I'll still always drop into the comments and say hello as well, because I do like building connections and saying hello to people on the internet. So, Kirsty, I'm going to let you introduce yourself first off, because some people who will be following this may well know who I am. They may well know who you are as well. But in a kind of back of the book blurb style, tell us about Kirsty.
I'm Kirsty Baggs-Morgan, and I am a recovering HR professional. So I spent, good Lord, almost 25 years working in HR leadership roles in the US, the UK, spent time in Asia, all over Europe. And my resilience journey kind of started when I got fired. And I say get fired because I was in America and there's no concept of redundancy in America. So it feels like getting fired. And so I got let go from a job in end of 2018. And ever since then, I've kind of pivoted what I'm doing. So, you know, hit rock bottom from a confidence perspective, realized that I didn't actually have any reserves of resilience and had to kind of claw my way back up step by step. So now I work as an HR consultant and also as a coach, and my focus primarily is around leadership, resilience, and strategy coaching for HR professionals. So basing a lot of that around my own personal journey with resilience, I've now kind of retrained as a resilience coach. I use psychometrics as well, and I'm fascinated by the impact that it has on people in and out of work, you know, which kind of started with my own learning. So there you go.
What would you say as well? I'm just going to say hello to I can see some comments starting coming in. Francesca, Samantha, hello. Thank you for joining us. If someone was watching this and they weren't sure exactly what resilience was, it might be a word that let's be honest, it's a word we've all heard. It's probably a word that every single person has used at some point, more and more so over the past few years, I would imagine as well. You know, you get those graphs. I'm going to look it up now and just see how much it is increased in its usage. Google do these good graphs showing how much it shows up in kind of written language over the years. It's not letting me do it. That was a disappointment. But it's a word that we've all used, and it does get used more and more and more. But most people probably struggle to define it in a simple sentence. Do you have a simple kind of definition that you use? Is it the dictionary definition? Is it something different?
I don't think I've got anything concise, but I mean, I've kind of built my own definition around what it's not. And it's not just your ability to bounce back from adversity, which is what you see a lot in terms of definitions. And that would be more of a reactive response. And I think that's the kind of resilience that I don't think I had when I needed it. So I think there's a wider definition, which is more around building some stores of resilience so that when adversity does hit, and it probably will at some point, you're better equipped to deal with it. So there's a proactive element to it that I think is missing from a lot of definitions. So, I mean, I'm trying to think in a nutshell, it's how we cope with stress and adversity, either before it hits us or when it hits us.
I like that. It's quite akin to my approach as well. And I just wanted to say as well, I don't know whether you probably can't see this, but another viewer who's come on, Kate Quinn, who I'm going to see if I can show this. Look at that profile picture.
I love it.
Yes,
Love it.
yes. Kate is part of heavy metal therapy, which is a CIC, which work around mental health and using heavy music as a I guess not a treatment, not an escape, but a coping strategy with various in various situations, and they're absolutely fantastic group. So yeah, part of the More Corpse Paint on LinkedIn brigade. Cool. I think that with your thoughts around resilience, there, it's quite similar to mine. And I would say that I think that even with that idea of the proactive approach to resilience and building that resilience, it's still almost that ability to bounce back from adversity that you mentioned, that's usually used in the kind of dictionary definitions. But our ability to do that it doesn't have to be reactive. I think that building those reserves or building those abilities in advance still has that same outcome of being able to come back from adversity. It's not just about being kind of able to deal with it in a sense where you don't break, or you're at less risk of breaking, but even potentially bouncing forward from that as well. So you're kind of coming back further than maybe where you started off. An analogy that I often use, because of coming from a background not just in teaching originally, but for the past kind of 10, 11 years being in the fitness industry, in some way, form or shape, some way, shape or form. I'm getting all my words in the wrong order, but it doesn't matter. The analogy that I often use is that we need stress and adversity in order to get fitter and stronger, in the same way as we need physical strain in order to get physically fitter and stronger. You know, you can't get stronger muscles by lifting weights that are easy. That just doesn't happen. You need to put your body under some kind of strain and then allow for recovery, and then your body adapts to that. And it's similar with your mind, similar with mental and emotional stress and strain. If you balance that stress and strain with recovery, and as long as the stress and strain that your mind is under is not too much, because again, if you go into a gym and you try and lift 200 kilos without having built up to it, you're going to cause yourself a physical injury. If you try and take on too much mental or emotional strain without building up to it, then you're going to cause yourself a psychological injury. So it's about making sure you're outside your comfort zone and you're stretching yourself, but not too much, and then allowing for the recovery period afterwards, because we know that obviously you don't get stronger during the workout, you get stronger after the workout. And I feel like that's akin to that resilience. Physical resilience is being able to cope with and recover from some kind of physical strain, right? It's your ability to do something and then recover afterwards. And it's how I define fitness as well. It's your ability to do a physical thing and then recover from it afterwards. That's what physical fitness is. And so your mental resilience or mental fitness is your ability to cope with and recover from mental stress, mental strain, emotional strain. So I think that it is still about that coming back from those challenges and that adversity. But your point about being able to build that capacity in advance is so, so vital. We can't just, in the same way as we can't just go and run a marathon tomorrow and be okay to recover from that effectively. We need to build those reserves in advance. Is that kind of, does that make sense?
It is, yeah. And as you were talking then, I think one of for me, a really good kind of example of that is around how we look at situations and how we respond mentally to situations when they arise. And, you know, I'm not going to talk about toxic positivity because it is not about being positive all the time, but there's a fairly strong element of resilience around being able to think more optimistically or more positively about a situation. And that might be as simple as, you know, it's a technique called positive reframing, but it might be as simple as just is there another way that I can look at this? Because if we kind of get sucked into the negativity of a situation, I think we find it an awful lot harder to pull ourselves out of it. So it's one of the practices that I've tried to evolve over the last few years, is asking myself, was there something I could learn from this? Was there another way I could look at this? And so that for me, I mean, I have a few questions that I have like listed on my notice board in my study, which are those sorts of things. And I always use my husband as an example, because he is like Mr. Positive Reframe. And I've learned an awful lot from him over the last few years, because like something crappy would happen and I'd be like, oh God, this has happened. And he just immediately goes, but what about thinking about it this way? Or, at least you've now got this. And he just seems to be able to do that naturally. And I think it makes him more resilient mentally. When something tricky comes up, he's very quickly able to see another side of it. So like I say, it's not about only seeing the good, but it's about seeing another side of it. And I think that's one of those things that you can kind of practice and learn to build up over time, that helps you when something comes your way that you weren't expecting.
I think it's a really useful tool to use, and I think that it's something I've been at both ends of that as well. I've been kind of struggling to see the positive in situations at various times and for various reasons, sometimes due to periods of my life where I've struggled with moderate to severe depression, where it becomes very, very difficult to see the positive in things. And I will use this opportunity to say at no point me or Kirsty saying that, just think happy thoughts and you'll be all right, because sometimes it's way harder to do that than it should be. But a lot of the other times it is possible to maybe just shift things by 1 or 2% even, and that can make us more able to access other tools as well. It's all of these tools in the toolbox for dealing with adversity can be used in tandem, and sometimes some of those things seem a bit inaccessible to us in the moment. And if we just do one thing which moves us ahead by 1 to 2%, it makes some of those other tools slightly more accessible. So it's about that balance and about kind of about using what's there in front of us. And that positive reframe, I've been on the other side of it, where I have been I bought into that kind of toxic positivity where it's always look on the bright side, everything's hunky-dory, law of attraction, just think happy thoughts and good things will happen to you. So I've been on both sides of that, and both sides are just as shit as the other one, to be honest. One of the period of my life where I was very much into this kind of positive thinking, law of attraction type stuff, ended with my second burnout, because I'd positioned myself to believe that I was in control of everything in my life, just by thinking a certain way, and just by if things weren't going my way, it's because I didn't believe that I deserved it, or that all of these things. And so I'd taken on more control than I actually had, or the belief that I had more control than I actually had, which was incredibly frustrating and a lot just as damaging as being moping around and kind of seeing the worst in everything. And that balance point of going, well, actually I can't control everything, but what can I control, is where I find myself now. And I call it pessimistic optimism, or optimistic pessimism. I can't even remember which way around, but it's when people ask me if I'm optimistic, I'm an optimist or a pessimist. I'm both. And the way I balance that is, the pessimist in me goes, shit is going to happen. Like, stuff is going to go horribly wrong at points, not just a little bit wrong. Horrible things are going to happen in life. This is me being positive. Horrible things are going to happen in life. They have happened in life. Horrible things have happened to me. Horrible things have happened to you. We're all going to be struggling with bereavement or illness or relationship breakups or financial worries. These kind of things are pretty common across the board. There are very few people who will never have to deal with anything. Let's be honest, even if you have the most privileged life, you are going to deal with bereavement at some point, because people die, and that is hard. So even at that most base level, we're going to have to face with adversity. So the optimist in me is, but I can deal with that. I have the ability to get through it. So my kind of framing now is positivity around my own capacity to learn, and that isn't just an individual thing. That's about the kind of the people that are around me as well. There's a kind of collective element to that, not just an individual element. But I know that me, with the support of the people around me, can get through those things without believing that life is going to be easy.
You've just said something really, really key there. With the support of the you have with the support of the people around me, that is massive in terms of building our resilience. So and it's difficult for some people. There are a lot of people who are very, very private and they don't want to talk about what's going on. And it's, it's not saying that you have to share everything that happens with you, but I know that one of the reasons I've got through some of my toughest situations is because I've got people in my life that I can talk to, lean on, rant to, get advice from, get a hug from, for lots of different types of situations. So it's like a very broad network. I've got professional contacts, personal contacts, family, friends, husband, all of those sorts of things. And I think having a kind of well-rounded group of people that you can rely on for support or just to talk to, that really helps people to cope with situations better as well. I think if you feel like you're facing something alone, or you don't feel comfortable talking to, you haven't got anybody, it's much harder. And I think we saw some of that during lockdown in 2020. Like people, the mental health issues, stress, anxiety, they all went through the roof during lockdown. And I know that a big part of that was there were people who weren't able to have that connectivity with others. And that's something that I've, and like I say, it's not about spilling your guts to anyone who will listen, although I am a horrifically open person and everybody kind of knows everything about me. I get that not everybody else is like that, but it's a really good way of managing stress and also helping to build your resilience by knowing that you don't have to manage this stuff on your own. You've got other people there that you can talk to. And I think that plays into, overall resilience building quite strongly.
Yeah, there's something that I've seen more over the past maybe couple of years, is the idea of resilience as a community characteristic, a group characteristic rather than an individual characteristic. I think that there's often these kind of pendulum swings where if something has been promoted as being a certain way for a long period of time, there is a knee jerk and a pendulum swing to the other side. Personally, I think that it's both. I mean, I'm always that guy sitting on the fence and in that grey area in the middle going, well, the answer's both. Like if someone asks me if I want cream or ice cream on my dessert, the answer is always both, as long as they're both vegan.
I was going to say, that's a tough one.
So,
both of us, actually. So
there we go. I think it's both. I think that resilience is an individual characteristic, but it's also a collective characteristic. And we can see this because in its most kind of simple explanation, if you like, in a group of people, there will be different levels of resilience between those people. And that's not to say that having more resilience is that's somehow those people are better than people with less resilience, because we're all just very different. And if our resilience is our ability to kind of cope with and recover from the demands and the adversity that we're facing and come back from that, it's going to vary from a day-to-day basis for each of us as individuals as well. Some days I'm more resilient than other days, and it depends on what I've already had to deal with, or am I in recovery from some other stuff happening, in which case my resilience is lower. Even as simple as how much sleep did I get, or what kind of quality sleep did I get? I will be more resilient if I've slept well, and I think most people will be. Our resilience is very, very low if we haven't slept well, if we haven't rested. So resilience does vary between individuals, even between that one individual on a daily basis. And so we know that it's not just a group thing because there's variety within the group. But also the reason we know it's a collective thing as well is because the same individual will have different levels of resilience, whether they are operating on their own or operating as part of a group. And the more that leaders in businesses, but any kind of organization, whether it's a business, a charity, a community group, or whatever, a family unit, any kind of collective, if these leaders understand that resilience is not just an individual characteristic, but a group characteristic, I think that the approach to building resilience in teams is going to be slightly different. Some of the things will still apply because giving people individual tools to benefit their own resilience is a good thing. But what can you do from a systemic perspective to build greater resilience as a group of people? There are some other tools and other approaches there which are being missed if you only see it as an individual thing.
What have you seen work well in a business or team capacity?
I think one of the biggest things, and it always comes back to this for me, depending on, you could look at any particular team and in any organization, in any industry, there will be differences between the teams in one company. There'll be differences between different companies in the same industry. There'll be differences between industries. But when it comes back to the real core point, I believe is communication more than anything. And if you start by having open and honest, but also structured communication, and this is something that I had a conversation with in the comments of a post on LinkedIn a little while ago about open communication. I think it was with a guy called Adrian Brown, who's a management consultant. And he was saying, yeah, open communication is great, but it's also chaos. So it has to be open and structured communication, because if people don't know where, for example, if your workforce don't know where to give the feedback and where to share how they're feeling on what things are working for them and what things aren't, they don't know where to do that. It doesn't really become open communication. So sometimes those parameters and boundaries we need to put in place in order to free things up. It gives a kind of an element of safety to it. So if we can create an environment where communication is happening in a structured but open way in every direction as well, this is not just from the top down, but people in the workforce are able to open up about what is working for them and what isn't working for them, what they're finding challenging at any one time, because there will be differences between individuals and between teams. It's not just going to be if everyone's struggling with if one person's struggling with their workload, everyone is. That's not the case, because there's so many different factors. If it starts with communication, then you're not just kind of trying to find your way in the dark. So I think the thing which has worked across the board that I've seen is encouraging leaders and equipping them with the skills to hear feedback, to not take it personally if it's not positive about the direction of the company or the organization, but treat it as an opportunity for improvement and development. There's a lot of ego in this stuff, and I understand that if a team that you're leading aren't happy, that is going to feel personal. But we aren't static. We can improve things. We can improve our skills as leaders. So if we are open to doing that, then that shouldn't feel like an attack. It should feel like an opportunity. I've also found that on that note, it often feels more like an attack if you don't have the channels open, because it feels like something slipped through the cracks. Whereas if you've gone, hey, what are you not happy with? You're ready to hear it. You've steeled yourself. You're expecting the blows, if you like. You've stepped into the ring and gone, hey, this is how I'm going to get better. Whereas if it happens without you asking, it can take you by surprise. And we're all human. I think that managers and leaders get a lot of flack for not leading as well as they should be, according to whoever it happens to be that's on their rant. But they're doing their best for the most part. Humans in general, I think, are pretty decent, and they are trying to do their best. And very rarely does someone go out and go, I'm going to try and fuck things up today. Very few people.
You haven't worked in financial services, have you, Joe?
I haven't. Feel like there's some stories there.
I had a situation in a company I worked with a few years ago, or a company I worked at a few years ago, where we experienced the very sudden death in service of our CEO. And that was, it was horrendous. Don't get me wrong. I'm thinking about it a few years down the line. I'm thinking about it from a resilience perspective, and that was a real example of like a collective situation where it was a small company. There were only about 40 of us, but everybody was experiencing it differently. Everybody was processing it differently, such as the nature of bereavement and grief. And interesting what you said about communication, because that was the decision that I took at the time as the HR lead, was like, we create communication channels. We keep them open for those who want them, but we don't insist on anybody having to use any of them if they don't want to. So it was about recognizing that we need to do something as a collective to enable people to work through this, but there are going to be individual approaches to it. Everybody's going to have their own way of dealing with it. And yeah, I mean, I think we handled it well. I feel like we handled it as well as you can do in those circumstances. But yeah, it's just confirming what you said about communication, whether the adverse situation is around something like a death in service, or whether it's business related, performance related, that sort of thing. Everybody kind of processes these things different. So it's about recognizing that there's a group and an individual element to it.
Absolutely. And I think that there's, a company can be resilient as well. The companies have to deal with change and adversity and challenge as an entity. And that adversity is, it could be as huge and disruptive as the past few years have been in terms of how companies operate, or it could be much smaller. But the companies which adapt to those changes are more likely to survive and thrive, in the same way as an individual who's more able to adapt to circumstances will have a high likelihood of being able to survive and thrive. A company is, by its very nature, made up of people. And I think that we sometimes forget that. I mean, the word company itself, like when you say, oh, we've got company, it's like, it just means a group of people. You can have a company being like a group of soldiers, for example, as well. Like it's a unit of some type. I don't know what type. I have no military background whatsoever. I wouldn't survive well in that kind of, I don't do well with authority, Kirsty.
Almighty, nor do I.
but I've heard that word used in that context, right?
Yeah.
And so it just means a group of people. That's what a company is. And we sometimes forget that, and that primarily at its most basic level, a company is a group of people with a common goal. And so the resilience of an organization and the adaptability of an organization, because I believe those two things go hand in hand, are based on the resilience and the adaptability of the individual teams within that and the individual people within that organization.
Well, resilience is all about adaptability, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, it's like, I've read through the stuff that you've produced for Stressonomics, and it's not static, it changes. And we have to recognize that you're not going to only ever have one approach to being resilient that's going to work for you in every single situation. And it's about building over time and developing and trying new things and seeing what works for you in different situations. But it's that need to be adaptable and flexible in how you approach different situations it's really key. Really key.
It absolutely is. I mean, one of the pillars of, thanks for bringing up Stressonomics, by the way. It's like I haven't mentioned it in the entire thing. So it says it up there, wherever it is. But yeah, one of the kind of principles, one of the core principles of it is adaptive resilience, because of that very nature. And I think that resilience in its, like by definition, is to do with adapting to what's happening. But I also think that resilience as a characteristic is different in different contexts. So the way we will be resilient in a certain situation is going to be different to the way we may be resilient in something else. We will each be, if you think about all of these different forms of adversity we might face, whether it's personal or professional, if you think about, someone might be incredibly resilient in terms of maybe a redundancy, but not very resilient in terms of a relationship breakdown or a divorce. Yeah. It doesn't necessarily mean that although it's the same overall characteristic, there are kind of subsets within that, and there may be certain triggers within certain scenarios which make it more difficult to deal with, because we're all a product of our experiences, and something may be more raw and more difficult around rejection in a certain context rather than in another context, for example. So I think that being aware, and that self-awareness of what our own resilience is and how we can harness it and where our weak spots are, I think the more that we know that, the more we can either develop those weak spots to be less of a weak spot, to work with our strengths and the things that we particularly are resilient and adaptable with, but also to look at where we need support from other people. And again, it comes back to that kind of collective nature. And how do we know where our weak spots are? How do we know where our strengths are? Well, we do that through communication, because it's very difficult to see these things in ourselves. In fact, our whole thinking framework of thinking that we develop over the years comes from social interaction. We're not born with a way. We're not born with a framework through which to understand the world. We build that framework through interaction with other people, and if we can encourage that within our teams, that people can share, hey, I find myself to be quite good at this, or I'm not so good at this, and this open and honest communication, we almost have this journey of discovery around what we're good at, what we're not so good at in terms of resilience, and also how we can improve those things, and what those next steps should be. But again, it comes back to that fostering an open communication and a structured communication within our teams, so that we can build a workforce that isn't scared of adversity and isn't scared of change and isn't scared of uncertain situations that are coming down the line. I'm not saying that these things shouldn't be scary and we shouldn't be scared at all, but sometimes it can be a kind of paralytic fear rather than maybe a stimulating excitement.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some of the stories that we tell ourselves around the things that are absolutely terrifying, when it actually comes to it, in reality, they're not at all. But there's an element there, I think, for leaders about it. There's a psychological safety element there around creating an environment where people feel comfortable saying, I'm really shit scared of standing up and speaking in front of a group of people. I feel like if I have to do that, I'm gonna fall over. I'm gonna make a complete fool of myself, whatever it is. And people need to be able to express that. And I think through the work that I do as a coach, some of the things that people come to me with that they're holding themselves back from doing out of a fear that they won't dare express to anybody else at work because they think it might be seen as silly, or other people won't understand why they're worried about it, and they just accept it, and they kind of stop themselves from doing things, and they accept it. And you just think, if you were able to share with your manager, I don't feel 100% comfortable about this, like, could we maybe work towards getting me there? Then I wouldn't need to be coaching people. If more managers adopted more of a coaching mentality with their teams, it would help solve an awful lot of problems. But there's that. People need to feel able to express what they do and don't feel comfortable doing, or what they think is going to be challenging for them, because it's like you said before, we've all got like completely different things that trigger us or bother us based on our own experience. So it can be easy to assume that everyone sees things the same way you do, and it's very rarely the case.
Absolutely. And I think that there's I think psychological safety, again, in its own way, is one of those buzzwords, a bit like resilience, where it's used a lot and a lot of people aren't entirely sure what it means, or more importantly, how to achieve it, more importantly, how to build that within their own organizations. And of course, it's kind of what you said around that safety to share ideas, make mistakes, and admit that actually this is a really scary thing, but without that fear of reprisals and repercussions, personally or professionally, is really interesting. I remember seeing something around the 4 stages of psychological safety. I think I came across it on LinkedIn originally. I'm trying to remember who did it, who posted about it, but I think he wrote a book about these kind of 4 stages. I'll have to look it up, and maybe if someone is watching this and they know, please bung it in the comments or tag the person in. There were these 4 different things, and I thought that what was good about this idea was it kind of broke it down into these different categories. And I brought up a little graphic at the side here just for reference for me. There was inclusion safety, learner safety, contributor safety, and challenger safety. And what I really liked about this is it formed a real clear structure of how to build up that overall psychological safety, which is, again, that a bit like physical safety is your ability to do stuff and do your job without getting hurt. This is what physical safety is, right? And so psychological safety is that. But on this inclusion safety, members feel safe to belong to the team. So it's safe to know that you feel valued, treat all people fairly, feel that your experience matters, include others regardless of title or position. So that's very much about that kind of inclusion piece around, which is heavily into the kind of diversity and equity and so on. And that's a big part of creating a workspace which is adaptable and resilient, is making sure that people feel included. And that's a huge part of it. It's not a nice to have. It's an absolute crucial element. Learner safety was about asking questions and feeling able to ask questions, experiment, learn from mistakes, look for new opportunities, and so on. Contributor safety was about feeling safe to contribute ideas, engage in an unconstrained way, interact with colleagues, mutual access, open dialogue, constructive debate, which is something which people are often very scared of. And then challenger safety, which I think is often the hardest one to implement, but arguably the most impactful once it's built up to this. And this is kind of the fourth of the 4 stages. It's being able to question others' ideas or suggest significant changes. Yes, Sam Langford in the comments, the Timothy R. Clark model of psychological safety. There we go, Timothy Clark. Yeah, so challenge the status quo, speak up, express ideas, identify changes, and expose problems. And that's such a huge one, because I remember hearing, I was working with someone a few months ago who was talking about how this had been an issue at NASA. I don't know the full story here, but it was a story they shared about people feeling too afraid to challenge their superiors on engineering issues, and people literally died. Because
oh my God,
because of the lack of psychological safety, because the juniors were going, this doesn't seem right. This seems like there's an obvious flaw in these designs and in this engineering, but none of them felt like they were able to question the senior engineers, and there were fatalities. I mean, that's not necessarily going to be a life or death situation in if you're working in finance.
No, but it makes me so glad that so many organizations have moved away from a traditional hierarchical model, because nobody died in the example I'm about to give you. But I can remember my first HR job in the City of London was for a huge investment bank, and we had grades. People had grades. So managing directors, we're talking late 90s here. The managing directors were grade 1. Directors were grade 2, and it went down to administrative staff that were grade 8. And I remember at the time I was 7. So I was like a junior HR advisor. I was like, second from bottom rung of the hierarchy. And I can remember coming out of a meeting once and being pulled in to see the head of HR, who said to me, you should not have asked that question in that meeting of that person, because he's a grade 4 and you're only a 7. And I remember walking away and thinking, are you joking? Like, I'm not even allowed to ask a question because somebody's 3 grades above me in some arbitrary grading structure that someone's come up with. Like, just utterly ridiculous. And that's, there was no psychological safety in that kind of environment. You challenged according to grade, not according to knowledge. I mean, thank God times have changed a little bit since then. You're probably going to have loads of comments now of people that still work in these horrible grading structures, but
well, I think that they do still exist, and even if not by name, by they exist unofficially, and there is that fear. If you look at 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, which is a really interesting book, and his rule number 1 in the 48 Laws of Power is never outshine the master. It's an interesting premise for a book if you haven't read it, and it's an uncomfortable read at times, but it's very much about how people throughout history have created these kind of structures of power and how you can use them yourself, which feels uncomfortable to me in a lot of ways.
I'm literally cringing in my seat.
Yeah. No, it's like I follow Robert Greene on Instagram still now, and but I like following people who make me feel uncomfortable. I like following people who challenge the way I look at things. But I mean, an example of one of the rules in that 48 laws is learn to keep people dependent on you. And I get the point, because again,
up a bit there.
Yeah, exactly. But I get the point he's making, because in order to have power over people, they need to be dependent of you. I think that the need for power is a whole other question. Why people feel the need to create this power over other people. But the reason his rule number 1 was never outshine the master is because people are egotistical, and they don't like that feeling of someone being better than them at something. And I get that there is an evolutionary hardwiring for this, this inherent need for competition. I think that we've moved past it a lot of the way, because we do also have an inherent genetic hardwiring for altruism and supporting each other and collective collaboration rather than competition. And often what we'll see is when there's collaborative approaches in teams, that they fly far further than the teams where there's a competitive element. However, you will get people in managerial and leadership positions who are scared that someone's coming for their job. And so if someone challenges those their ideas, they think that they're trying to undermine them. And I think that that's where this issue with closed off communication and lack of psychological safety, especially challenger safety, is, because people are scared of looking bad. And it just goes to show that people in these positions, in these leadership positions, have just as much imposter syndrome as anyone else, if not more, because they've been elevated to a position that they're thinking, I'm just a guy, I'm just a woman, I'm just whoever, I'm just a person. Why do people trust me this much? Why have I been put here? Oh my God, I'm petrified I'm going to mess up. Because the responsibility, the higher up you go, is obviously a greater level of responsibility. The higher you are, the further you've got to fall, and all of that kind of thing. And so we need to create psychological safety for the leaders as well, because if we don't create that feeling of actually going, well, if someone challenges my ideas, that's okay. I'm not going to lose everything if someone challenges my ideas. Then that creates that psychological safety for the people working within their teams as well. We can't just say, oh, well, you need to do this. You've got to create it for them as well. Which can be very hard if you're starting at the top, because who do you create, or how do you create psychological safety for the CEO? You know what I mean? So it becomes very challenging. But if you look at kind of C-suite or board level, it starts with creating psychological safety between those people, so that then they actually feel comfortable with those other things coming up from underneath as well.
God, and that's like a whole other conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely it is. And it's a hard thing to start. But one thing that I've noticed is that if you working from top down is obviously important, because that's where a lot of culture comes from. And if the CEO and the board are acting in a certain way, or whether this could be at any size company, it could be in a huge company, or it could be in an SME, but if the people at the top are acting in a certain way, that sets the tone. Of course it does. However, you can create pockets of change within an organization of any size. If you've got a company of 100 people and you get these pockets of change happening in a certain department within that company, let's say the marketing team start behaving in a certain way, the marketing lead starts behaving in a certain way with their team, and then other departments go, oh, I like what they're doing there, and it kind of, you start bringing people in at a grassroots level. I don't think the approach, again, is one or the other. I think it's both. If you're working with an organization and you're trying to instigate this kind of cultural change around resilience, and you say to the people at the top who've brought you in, this is how we're going to do it, you guys need to do this, but also I'm going to go into the factory floor type teams and work with them at a grassroots level as well, so that then when they start changing and they look over at the leadership and go, oh, well, they're starting to change too. It's not about being perfect. It's not about having all the answers, even if you're in a leadership position. It's about going, hey, this is the direction we're going in. This is new for us too, but this is what we're trying to do. The motivation for it might be very different. The motivation for an individual might be that I want to be more resilient. I want to be more able to deal with stress, so I have a better quality of life. Because our ability to cope with adversity dictates our quality of life to a vast degree. But for the leadership, it might be we want a more resilient team, and we want our people to be more resilient, and our teams to be more resilient, so that we can turn a greater profit. We can keep our costs down and people are performing at a high level. Both of those are fine. Just because they are different goals doesn't mean that the means are different. The same stuff that improves quality of life improves performance. And if a leadership team can be open enough about that and say, yes, of course we want you to perform better, this is a business, but the same things that will help you perform better will have these effects for you, so let's all pull in the same direction, rather than having this, oh, well, we really care about you and your feelings and your life and your well-being. And it's like, no, it feels disingenuous. Even if it isn't, it feels like it is. Even if you genuinely really, really care, and I do believe that most leaders really do care about their people for the most part. Even if you do really care, your people don't believe that you do. They just see it as you're just trying to get more work out of me. And there's this disconnect in terms of trust. If you can be honest about it and go, well, yeah, we do want you to perform better, but we also want you to have a good quality of life, and that benefits us as well, then people will go, oh, well, at least you're being honest about it. Count me in.
It's really interesting because I think like a good example of that is the whole 4-day week experiment that people have been doing. So I'm working with a corporate client at the moment who trialed the 4-day week for 3 months initially, found that productivity went through the roof, and have kept it. And when I asked the employees, what they like about working for the company, every single one of them, a bit small company, but every single one of them was like, oh my God, the 4-day week. Like, we genuinely now have enough time to do, like, they use Fridays to run errands, and then they have their weekends free with their kids or with their families or whoever they want to spend their weekends with. But there was there's a business reason for doing that, because productivity's gone up and people, no salary cuts. They're not working longer hours on the 4 days. They're just simply working 4 days a week for the same money, and they're getting more done. But the CEO's rationale for doing it was additionally to give people time back with their families, because you shouldn't have to spend all of your non-working time running around trying to do life admin. So giving everybody an extra day. So he had a genuine reason, both professionally and personally, for wanting to do this for people. And I think they do believe it. I think in that particular organization, they get it, because that's what he's like. And they know that he's trying to create a good environment for people. But it's really interesting seeing other companies do it. I think where you've got that genuine care for people's well-being and stress levels, as well as wanting the business to succeed, I think they can sense it. I think people know.
Yeah.
But I've worked with other organizations where it wouldn't even enter their heads, and they're trying to squeeze every single last hour out of people. Or how many companies have I worked for where you get around to a bonus time, because of financial services background, bonus time was a big thing, and having discussions every year where someone was like, well, they're always there late. And so you're rewarding that behavior, and then it's like you don't give a stuff about these people's lives outside of work. You just want them here tied to their desks for as long as possible, because you think that's going to create more of an output for you. And I think people can see that as well. They know when they're being used for things.
But it seems so short-sighted to me as well, because I think that we've got enough of an understanding now that doesn't improve output. And I think that the thing which is holding companies back, and I get that there's certain roles which that doesn't work for. There's certain roles which require a station to be manned, and it is about hours. And you can't build in the flexibility in the same way. So it isn't, again, there is no one size fits all answer for this. But if you look at kind of general kind of knowledge work, as they call it now, and the nature of a lot of work in the kind of in the UK in particular is where I do most of my work, and European countries and the United States and places like that, it's mostly knowledge work. And that knowledge work is not time bound. It can be done whenever and in however much time. If you're working in marketing, for example, and your job is to put together marketing campaigns, that doesn't matter when you do them, as long as they're done by the deadline. Doesn't matter what time of day you do them. Doesn't matter how many hours it takes you, as long as the outcome is there. And so most people find that if you're working 8-hour days, 5 days a week, you're not actually they're not 8 productive hours. And you can get the same amount done if you've got like this idea of going, okay, well, actually, if I can get the same quality of work done in 4 hours today rather than 8 hours, and I get those 4 hours back, I'm going to do just as good work in those 4 hours, because I'm just going to be more focused on it. And I do think that that's something which is more well understood. And I think that the argument for going, well, we can't cut down people's hours by 20% because the business can't afford it, is not looking at the evidence. It's not looking at, well, does that mean that you'll be reducing output? Because the trials are showing something very, very different. And I think, again, that comes back to the fear of the leadership to change something that big when you've done it a certain way for so long, and you think, God, this is going to be really disruptive. It means that I'm going to have to change the way I do things, or at least I'm going to have to change my beliefs about certain things, which I've held for a very long time. And that terrifies me. I think that if we can have more open conversations about, it's okay to feel scared of that, and it's okay for you as a leader to be like, oh my God, this is a huge change. I'm going to struggle to cope with that because of how like the beliefs that I've held for decades. Then if you've got a kind of a collection of leaders from one company or from various companies all saying that kind of thing, that individual goes, oh, it's not just me then. And then you've again got this collaborative resilience, this collective resilience of leaders within one company or across various companies who are supporting each other through change, supporting each other through adversity and challenge in a way which allows for adaptation and allows for that resilience to kind of shine, so that coming out the other side, you've actually become stronger as a result of that.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's funny. I'm reading Stolen Focus at the moment by Johan Hari. I don't know if you've read it, but it talks about.
I haven't read it, no.
It's fascinating. It makes you want to throw my phone in the sea.
It's the one about all the distractions, isn't it?
Totally. And but how the 4-day week has been really helpful for companies, because our attention spans are so much shorter than they used to be, that actually only working 4 days a week means that people are concentrating more, they're holding their attention for longer, they're actually getting, that's where the productivity thing comes from. So it's, some of it is around that whole, collective dumbing down of all of us through technology and smartphones and all of that stuff. But it's really interesting how people still hold on to that old model of a 5-day week and work all the hours that God sends. So there are still people holding on to that. And I think it's only because it's what they know. It's not because, all the evidence points to the contrary around it being the best recipe for getting more work done. And people just hold on to it. I don't know why that is. I can't imagine an emotional attachment to a 5-day week, but
it's the same thing which happened. I mean, this is going back a few years, a long time before we were around. But when they changed to a 5-day week, and I don't know how much truth is in the whole thing about it being originally promoted by Henry Ford and stuff like that as being the kind of the big move.
Yeah, that's the urban legend, isn't it? I don't know.
It is, and I don't know the truth of it, and I don't want to claim that I do. But if we go with that, Henry Ford was an industrialist. He had he had a great success with his company. Probably not the most savoury of characters in various other ways as well. Again, I've heard that he has some quite questionable political views, which I'm not going to go into. But the reason that he promoted cutting down to a 5-day working week was because he found that if people had 2 days off, they came back to work and performed at a much higher level than if they didn't have those 2 days off. And it's like he took that from an industrialist perspective and went, well, I want to get everything out of these people. It's wage labor. He just was there trying to make a killing on what he was producing. He was only concerned with profit, and he was like, well, let's give them 2 days off, because what I've noticed is that when they've done that, they come back and they're highly productive on this production line producing cars, and therefore we make more money as a result of giving them those 2 days off. That was like 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, or about, I don't know, around 100 years ago. And
1932, I just Googled it.
There we go. So nearly 100 years ago.
Nearly 100 years ago, yeah.
And it's the same argument that's happening now. So at the time, people were probably like, are you nuts? You're going to give people 2 days a week off? That's like, you're losing 2 days of productivity. And he's like, no, I'm not. And yet nearly 100 years later, we're having the exact same conversation, despite the fact that that's been proven now for nearly 100 years. Nearly a century has shown that, where you go, well, actually, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, having a weekend. If we didn't have a weekend, people burn out. And it's like, well, why not make that weekend a bit longer? Oh no, can't do that.
Yeah,
We'll lose productivity.
Oh, that's funny. We got way off topic there again, didn't we?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to happen. No, it's kind of on topic. I think that the way that can be on topic is that in order to build resilience, we need to have stress and rest. That's that stress plus rest equals
Oh my
growth
God,
kind of
yes.
formula. In order
Yeah,
to develop our resilience, we need downtime for our bodies and our minds to recover from it. Boom,
yeah,
there we go.
yeah,
And
absolutely
I think
true.
that, let's be honest, the side of that equation that's a little bit out of kilter is that a lot of people are under a huge amount of stress and strain and don't have enough rest or don't have enough recovery. And when I say rest, I don't necessarily mean physical rest. I mean emotional and psychological rest, time away from work, which could well be physically active. In fact, physical activity is a great way of recovering from psychological stress, to be physically
Yeah,
active. If you've got a very physically demanding body, then you need physical rest. But
yeah.
have a think about what your work entails. If it's mostly sat at a desk, you don't need physical rest, and the exhaustion that you feel at the end of the week is not physical exhaustion; it's emotional and
No,
mental
God,
exhaustion.
no. Yeah, I mean,
So
that's
it's
one of the best things I've done for my mental resilience is my walks. I've counteracted my mental stress with physical activity. So I walk 1 hour every day, 7 days a week. And because I live in Malta and it's like 35 degrees right now, I do that at 5 o'clock in the morning every day. And I've been doing it for about 2 years now. And it's been an absolute game changer in terms of just getting my brain in the right place for the day. So it helps me kind of let go of anything that's swimming around in my head in the morning. And that's when I listen to my heavy metal. See, I managed to get it in there. That's
yay.
I have days where I'll be in the mood for a podcast, but there are days where my brain doesn't want to take in any information. It just wants to listen to Aborted or
Yeah.
Ingested or something like that. And it's weird because I only ever listen to death metal. If I'm going to listen to metal when I'm walking, sometimes I listen to pop, weird. But if it's going to be metal, it's always death metal when I'm walking, or like, really gnarly, like grindcore or something. I would not want, I couldn't like walk around listening to Bring Me the Horizon.
Yeah.
That would feel wrong. It has to be like death metal. That's just my thing.
I tried to do a workout the other day listening to what was I listening to? It's something really proggy. It was like a prog metal playlist, and all the songs were
Just
like
start like doing Irish
9
dance
minutes
in the
long,
middle of
and
your
there's no
workout.
kind of, it's all time signature changes and stuff like that, and really and I was just like, can't work out to this. Like there's no, the rhythm is throwing me off. I can't do kettlebell swings to this. For me, it's always like, for me, my workout music at the moment, because again, for me, that's a huge way of me managing my kind of my mental stress and strain and keeping myself mentally well, is staying physically active. Kate's just said in the
Black metal
comments,
for cleaning. I love that, Kate.
black metal for cleaning. So the kind of hardcore at the moment, bands like Knock Loose and stuff like that.
Okay.
That's good workout music, I find.
Rammstein to the treadmill.
Yeah, I
Marching
find,
music, basically. So yeah.
yeah, there's all kinds of stuff there, and I think that's the thing, is that music can be a great release for a lot of people. And we probably could have talked about that a lot more, but we've kind of
Yeah.
come up. We've been talking now for 58 minutes.
Oh my God, that's probably enough.
It probably is, isn't it? Should we let people like have a little break from us, because this has probably been quite stressful. What I'll ask you for the last kind of 2 minutes, then, if someone's listening to this and they, let's say two things, in fact, two sides to the same question. If you're an individual and you want to build your own personal resilience, what would you suggest as a good starting point? And if you're a leader and you want to develop resilience within your team, what would you suggest as a good starting point?
Well, individually, I think for me, it's around bookending your day with a solid routine. And it doesn't need to be going out and walking for an hour every day. It needs to be the things that you said, like getting decent sleep, eating nutritious food, making sure you've got time to rest. So it's like making sure that your head is in a good space morning and evening. That would probably be my first tip. From a leadership perspective, I'm going to go back to communication again. I'm going to be like, just start being more open with communication. Start talking about things that go wrong and encouraging people to be open about things that have gone wrong so that they get comfortable with having those conversations. But I think you have to set the tone as a leader for those types of discussions within your team before people will feel completely comfortable, owning up to things that have messed up or that haven't quite gone as planned.
I think as an individual and as a collective, these things take time. And I think that having patience in terms of allowing yourself time to develop your own resilience and also allowing your team time to develop their resilience as well, and how they work together and how comfortable they feel opening up and having these conversations. I think being patient is a big part of both of those things.
Absolutely. Yeah. Can't just flick a switch and be resilient tomorrow.
No, it would be nice, wouldn't it? It would be nice.
It would.
Kirsty, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you so much for sharing, parts of your story, your wisdom, your approach to these things. Really appreciate it. Hopefully that people watching this have taken some great value from it. I like Sam's comment there: random, honest, insightful, and relevant. Random
That's
and
random
relevant.
that's my number one. That's me.
I think that Samantha as well would be have enjoyed the kind of references to grief and bereavement as particular adversities that we'll face throughout life, because that's a big area of expertise. Me and her wrote an article together recently on that was really interesting. If you haven't read that, Kirsty, you should really read it.
I will do.
Once again, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for watching this. Please do share this around with people that you think will benefit from this kind of chat. Leave some comments, tag people in, send some likes, send some other reactions, because obviously the more engagement you throw on this, the more people it reaches. And if the more people it reaches, hopefully it'll help more people. I'm sure that this will not be the last time that we have a chat, Kirsty, but thank you once again, and I'll speak to you very soon.
Excellent. Thanks a lot.